My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29 years old, and this is how I made my fiancé's family regret ever mocking me in their own kitchen. I'm sitting here in my little kitchen, glass of wine in hand, and even now, just thinking about that night makes my stomach tighten. It was last Thanksgiving. Adam, my fiancé at the time, had invited me to spend the holiday with his family at their estate in Connecticut. And when I say estate, I mean the kind of place with a long, winding driveway, chandeliers in the bathrooms, and a separate wing just for the wine cellar. I come from a different world. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind where everybody knows everybody, and the best meals are the ones you don't need a white tablecloth for. My grandmother ran a diner there for over 30 years, and I grew up peeling potatoes and watching her pour her heart into every plate she made. Food, to me, has always been about warmth, about love, about comfort. So when Adam's mother, Veronica, a woman who wears pearls to brunch, asked if I could bring a dish to their Thanksgiving dinner, I wanted to bring a little piece of home with me. I made my grandma's buttermilk chicken pot pie. It's nothing fancy. No microgreens or imported truffle shavings. Just tender chicken, fresh vegetables, creamy filling, and flaky buttermilk biscuits on top. It's the kind of meal that hugs you from the inside. I arrived at the estate that afternoon, pot pie in hand, heart pounding harder than I cared to admit. The kitchen was already buzzing. Veronica was there, along with Adam's sister Brooke, and two of their aunts, all of them with perfect blowouts, manicured hands, and designer aprons. As I carefully set my dish on the counter, I caught the whispers. I didn't know people still used canned biscuits. Then another voice, a sharp laugh. So quaint, bless her heart. My face burned. I forced a polite smile, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Adam was standing nearby, and instead of stepping in, he gave an awkward little chuckle like he was just as embarrassed by me as they were. And that, somehow, stung even worse than their snickering. For the next half hour, they put on a show of politeness to my face, asking about the recipe, calling it adorable. But the second I'd step out of the room, I'd hear another jab about my cheap diner food or how I must have gotten the recipe off a soup can label. Looking back, I should have left right then, walked out the door, taken my pot pie, and driven home to where people knew the difference between food made for show and food made for love. But I didn't, because 1 hour later, someone walked through that door who changed everything. I grew up in a little town called Millersburg, Pennsylvania, the kind of place where people still wave to each other on Main Street, and the same families have been sitting in the same church pews for generations. My grandmother, Ruth Carter, no relation to Adam's family, just a coincidence of last names, owned a diner there for over 30 years. Ruthie's diner wasn't just a place to eat. It was a gathering place. I practically grew up in that kitchen, standing on a milk crate to reach the counter, watching my grandmother turn the simplest ingredients into meals that made people forget about whatever bad day they were having. She wasn't some trained chef. She didn't care about fancy techniques or picture-perfect plating. She believed good food wasn't meant to impress people. It was meant to feed their soul. From the time I was little, I knew I wanted to follow in her footsteps. I didn't go to culinary school. Couldn't afford it, to be honest. And truthfully, I never cared to. Everything I needed to know, I learned in that diner. How to tell when a piece done by the smell. How to calm a broken heart with a grilled cheese. How to run a kitchen with equal parts love and iron will. When Grandma Ruth passed away 2 years ago, it nearly broke me. She left me her recipe book, this old, leather-bound notebook with smudged ink and food stains on every page. It's my most prized possession. But life being what it is, dreams have to wait sometimes. Right now, I work as a paralegal in the city. It pays the bills. And every extra dollar I save goes into a little account labeled the Diner 2.0. My dream is to open a little bistro someday. Nothing big or pretentious. Just a place where people can come in, eat good food, and feel like they belong. I've never been ashamed of where I come from. Not once. But when I met Adam Carter, I started to learn that some people think roots like mine are something to be outgrown. I met Adam at a law firm gala 3 years ago. He was one of the junior partners at a big firm downtown, handsome in a clean-cut, buttoned-up kind of way, tall, charming. The kind of guy who could make ordering coffee sound like a speech. What drew me in was how he made me feel like I belonged, at least at first. He'd tell me how refreshing it was to meet someone real, someone who didn't care about titles or name-dropping. I fell for him hard. But from the beginning, being with Adam meant stepping into a world that felt nothing like mine. His family was, well, let's just say, the Carters belonged to that old money crowd that still sends out holiday cards with embossed foil borders and keeps track of who belongs at which country club. Every gathering was a performance. I was always aware of how my thrift store dress or my diner stories didn't quite fit in between their talks of ski trips in Aspen or charity galas for cousins. I couldn't even pronounce. Adam tried, in his own way, to bridge the gap. But looking back, it was always on his terms. He'd laugh off my stories, call me his little small-town girl like it was a quirky trait, not something to be proud of. He'd downplay where I came from when introducing me, and I, against my better judgment, let him. Told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was how he treated me in private. Not how his mother made backhanded comments about simple tastes, or how his sister gave me pitying looks like I was some charity case. When he proposed 6 months before that Thanksgiving dinner, I was over the moon. I truly thought it meant things were changing. That maybe, finally, I was being welcomed in. But the signs were all still there. His mother barely acknowledged the ring. His family made no effort to get to know me better. If anything, they seemed annoyed that I hadn't disappeared after a few months of dating. I kept telling myself to tough it out. That love was about compromise. That maybe, with time, they'd see me for who I really was. The only people who ever truly saw me were back home. My best friend Mara, who's got a mouth like a sailor and a heart of gold, never sugarcoated it. She hated Adam from the start. Told me some people wear suits so no one sees how rotten they are underneath. And then there was Grandma Ruth, who always told me never to let anyone make me feel small. You're a Carter, she'd say, and not the kind who needs a yacht to prove it. I swore to myself that I'd never let anyone, no matter how rich or polished, make me feel like less than I am. But somehow, there I was on Thanksgiving Day, standing in that gleaming kitchen, clutching my grandmother's pot pie while a room full of socialites mocked me like I was the help. And no matter how many times I told myself their opinions didn't matter, a part of me started to believe them. The Carters' estate was even more intimidating than I remembered. Gold-trimmed crown moldings, marble floors you could practically see your reflection in, and those massive oil paintings of ancestors glaring down from the walls like they were silently judging anyone who didn't belong. The dining room looked like something out of a magazine spread. Long mahogany table set with crystal, linen napkins folded into swans, and an army of staff in black and white uniforms gliding around like ghosts. Dinner at the Carters wasn't your typical Thanksgiving. There was no football game on in the background, no kids running around, no mismatched plates piled with too much food. Each family member arrived with some impossibly complicated hut cuisine dish. Roasted quail with truffle risotto, candied persimmon tarts, something called a deconstructed pumpkin soup served in tiny glass tumblers. Even Adam's teenage cousin had brought some lavender-infused creme brulee she made at a cooking camp in France. And then there was my dish, my grandmother's buttermilk chicken pot pie. It sat there on the buffet, simple and humble in its white ceramic dish, steam curling from the golden brown crust. It wasn't trendy or delicate. It was made to fill you up, to comfort you, to taste like home. I was proud of it, right up until the sneering started. Brooke, Adam's sister, poked at the edge of the crust with her manicured finger and smirked. "It's very rustic," she said, like it was the worst thing she could imagine. Another aunt, I think her name was Diane, lifted the corner of the lid and made a face. "Did you say canned soup?" "Oh, how quaint." The worst part wasn't them. I'd half expected it, honestly. It was Adam. He was standing right there, close enough to hear every word. And instead of saying something, instead of stepping in like I hoped he would, he laughed along. Not a big laugh, but that awful little chuckle people do when they're embarrassed for you and trying to distance themselves. My stomach dropped. I swallowed hard and forced a brittle smile. Tried to tell myself it didn't matter, that their approval wasn't worth craving. But it chipped away at me like 1,000 tiny paper cuts. And then came the final straw. Veronica, holding court at the head of the table like the queen she believed herself to be, called out across the room as the staff was preparing to serve dinner. "You know," she said, raising her wine glass with a tight, brittle smile, "I guess every family needs a charity case to feel good about. Emily, dear, you really should leave this kind of thing to professionals." The room erupted in polite, restrained laughter, the kind of laughter that cuts deeper because it's so controlled. I felt my face flush hot, my vision blur, my hands shook, and for a second, I wasn't even sure if my feet would move. I mumbled something about needing more wine and slipped out of the dining room. My chest felt tight, like I couldn't catch a full breath. I pushed open the pantry door and let it swing shut behind me. In the dim light, surrounded by shelves of imported spices and $1,000 bottles of olive oil, I sank down against the wall and let the tears come. Silent, angry ones. The kind that burn because you hate yourself for letting people like that get to you. I sat there, knees pulled up to my chest, wondering how the hell I'd let it get this far. Wondering if Adam ever really saw me, or if I'd just been a novelty he could show off when it suited him and tuck away when it didn't. Was this what my life was going to be? Holidays pretending I belonged, swallowing insults with forced smiles, while the man I loved stood by and let it happen? I didn't hear the door open until someone cleared their throats softly. I looked up, quickly wiping at my face, and saw one of the kitchen staff, an older man with kind eyes and a weathered face. His name tag said Lou. He crouched down beside me, not saying anything at first. Then he handed me a clean dish towel to wipe my face. "You know," he said quietly, with a little smile, "some of the best meals I've ever had came out of diners and church kitchens. Don't let them take your fire." It was such a simple thing, but in that moment, it cracked something open. Inside me, I stayed in that pantry a few minutes longer than I should have, clutching the dish towel Lou gave me like a lifeline. His words lingered in my head. This tiny spark in a dark, humiliating night. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and promised myself I wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. When I finally stepped back into the dining room, it felt like walking into a lion's den. The room was aglow with soft candlelight and the clinking of crystal glasses. Every face turned toward the main course being served, and I forced a smile as if nothing had happened. But the insults didn't stop. They were just delivered in that clipped, polite tone that people like the Carters had perfected, the kind of comments that sound almost complimentary if you weren't paying attention. Brooke raised her glass and said, "To family, and to those who try their best." A few tight smiles around the table. Adam's teenage niece, a smug little thing named Madison, pulled out her phone and filmed a plate of my pot pie, adding a filter and a text overlay that read, "Trailer Park Chic." I caught the reflection in the glass cabinet behind her and felt my stomach turn. I leaned toward Adam, hoping for some kind of lifeline, and whispered, "Can you please say something? This is getting cruel." He barely looked up from his wine. "Come on, Em," he muttered, almost annoyed. "Don't be so sensitive. They're just messing around." That was it. That one sentence flipped a switch in me, because in that moment, I realized I could spend the rest of my life like this, showing up to events where my food, my clothes, my words would be picked apart, laughed at behind closed doors, and the person who was supposed to love me would keep shrugging it off, like it wasn't a big deal. I'd be the charity case wife, the one they tolerated for Adam's sake. I was invisible to them, and worse, I was becoming invisible to him. The only person who seemed to notice my discomfort was Lou. As the staff cleared away the dinner plates and prepped for dessert, he passed behind my chair and murmured just loud enough for me to hear, "Heads up, kid. Someone big's about to show." Veronique's old culinary school buddy. I turned slightly in my seat, catching his eye. "Who?" He gave a tiny shrug, a sly smile. "Daniel Harper. Ever heard of him?" My breath caught. Daniel Harper, world-renowned chef, multiple Michelin stars, TV show host, cookbook author, basically culinary royalty. Even I, who didn't care about celebrity chefs, knew who he was. And he was about to walk through those doors any minute. And that's when it hit me. I remembered the small Tupperware container I'd packed that morning. A batch of my grandma's buttermilk biscuits I was planning to drop off at Adam's office the next day. I'd made them late the night before, partly because baking still made me feel close to Grandma Ruth, partly because Adam's secretary always gushed about them. They were still in my car, parked in the long driveway out front, for the first time all evening. Something like hope flickered in my chest. I excused myself from the table under the pretense of taking a phone call and slipped outside into the cold night air. The estate grounds were lit by soft garden lights, and I moved quickly, heart pounding as I popped open the trunk of my car and grabbed the container. The biscuits were still slightly warm, wrapped in a clean dish towel just like Grandma Ruth used to do. When I stepped back inside, I made a beeline for the kitchen. Lou spotted me immediately and raised an eyebrow. I held up the container, breathless. "Can you warm these up? Maybe serve them with coffee?" He didn't hesitate, just took the container, pulled a tray from the warmer, and set to work like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You got it, kid," he murmured. "I'll slip them in with the dessert." The other kitchen staff barely noticed, too caught up in polishing the already gleaming plates and prepping the high-maintenance desserts. Veronica had ordered delicate little chocolate souffles and spiced pear tarts. Lou moved quickly, buttering the tops of my biscuits and slipping them into the oven for a quick warm. The smell of them rising hit me like a wave of nostalgia, and for the first time all night, I felt steady. I glanced toward the dining room as the doors opened and the buzz shifted. A tall man with silver-streaked hair and a presence that practically swallowed the room walked in, and I knew it had to be Daniel Harper. Veronica was already halfway across the floor, gushing and clinging to his arm like they were still 22. In culinary school, Lou slid the biscuits onto a fresh platter, draped a clean cloth over them, and gave me a wink. Let's see what real food folks think of these. For the first time in hours, I smiled for real, because whatever happened next, I just put a piece of my grandmother's legacy on that table, and I didn't care what label they slapped on it. It belonged there. The shift in the room was immediate the moment Chef Daniel Harper walked through those double doors. Conversations halted mid-sentence, wine glasses frozen halfway to lips, and every head turned toward the tall, silver-haired man with the kind of quiet authority that made even the most self-important socialite shrink back a step. Veronica was on her feet in an instant, her hand clutching her pearl necklace like she might actually swoon. "Daniel," she gushed, crossing the room in 3 strides, her voice a little too high, a little too eager. "It's been years." Chef Harper smiled politely, giving her a quick embrace before scanning the room with a practiced, knowing gaze. He greeted a few others, exchanging stiff pleasantries, but his attention drifted toward the dessert table where the souffles, eclairs, and perfectly manicured tarts gleamed under the soft chandelier light. And then came the moment. Lou emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of my grandmother's biscuits, arranged neatly under a white linen cloth. The smell alone softened the air, that rich, buttery warmth of something made to feed a person's soul, not their ego. He placed them beside the coffee service without ceremony, and I stood there, my pulse thrumming in my ears, wondering if anyone would even notice them. They did. Chef Harper reached for one almost absent-mindedly, the way someone who's been in 1,000 dining rooms can tell by instinct when something doesn't belong and might just be worth it. He took a bite, and the room held its collective breath. I watched as he chewed, his brow furrowing slightly. Then his whole expression changed. He set down his wine glass, looked around the room, and said, clear and certain, "Who made these?" You could have heard a pin drop. No one spoke. Every face turned toward the tray, then back to him. Veronica, recovering her composure, let out a brittle little laugh. "Oh, those? I'm sure they're from who?" Chef Harper repeated, his voice sharper now. "Made these biscuits." My throat went dry. I was half a second from pretending not to hear when Lou caught my eye and gave me a subtle nod. I raised my hand. The silence was so heavy it felt like the chandelier might crash from the weight of it. Chef Harper's face broke into a genuine, almost nostalgic smile. He made his way over, stopping in front of me. "You made these?" he asked. I nodded, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, sir. It's my grandmother's recipe." He reached out and shook my hand, firm and warm. "Well, I'll be damned. These are perfect." Veronique's face paled, the blood visibly draining from her cheeks as she stammered. "Well, I mean, of course they're fine for a rustic sort of." "No." Chef Harper cut her off without even glancing in her direction. "These aren't fine for a rustic anything. These are what food's supposed to taste like. Reminds me of this little diner back in my hometown. The kind of place you go when you need something real. Food with a soul. You don't find that much anymore." The room remained dead silent. every polished guest shifting awkwardly in their seats, not sure whether to sip their wine or vanish into the woodwork. Veronica forced a brittle smile. Well, we do have very high standards here, of course. Most of tonight's dishes were prepared with quite advanced techniques. Chef Harper turned to her then, his smile fading. That's your problem, Veronica. You're so obsessed with technique. You forgot what a kitchen's really for. It's not about showing off. It's about making people feel something. He gestured to the tray of biscuits. This makes you feel something. I could see Adam from across the table, frozen, his face unreadable. But his earlier laughter hung heavy in the air. It had been cruel, small, and now painfully obvious. He looked like he wanted the floor to open and swallow him whole. Chef Harper asked if I'd mind sharing the recipe. Only if you're willing, he added with a wink. I smiled, my hands still shaking, but steadier than they'd been all night. I'd be honored, sir. In that moment, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliating Veronica or making Adam squirm, though both of those were satisfying in their own way. It was about something bigger, about reclaiming my grandmother's legacy, about standing up and finally letting them see that what they mocked was the very thing that made me proud. And for the first time all evening, I felt seen. As the evening wound down, the guests began gathering their coats and murmuring their polite goodbyes. But the air in that ornate dining room felt forever changed. The flawless veneer Veronica had so carefully curated had cracked, and beneath it, everyone could feel the shift. No one made another comment about my dish. No one so much as looked at me sideways. I wasn't invisible anymore. And not because I'd forced my way into their approval, but because, for the first time, I didn't need it. Chef Harper caught me near the foyer as he was leaving, slipping a simple cream-colored card into my hand. You've got something rare, Emily, he said, his voice warm and steady. If you ever want advice when you open your place, or just need someone to taste test a batch of biscuits, give me a call. He winked, giving my shoulder a squeeze before walking out into the crisp night. I clutched the card like it was worth more than anything in that house, because to me, it was. I found Adam standing by the grand fireplace, drink in hand, staring into the flames like a man trying to disappear into them. He didn't even look up as I approached. I stood there for a long moment, staring at him, wondering how I could have missed what was always so plain. The truth is, I hadn't missed it. I'd ignored it. I'd shrunk myself down, rounded off my edges, swallowed my pride, all so I could fit into a life that was never meant for me. You know, I said quietly, my voice calm but certain. I spent so much time trying to make myself small for you. Trying to laugh off the jokes, pretend I didn't hear the insults, act like it didn't matter when you looked the other way. He finally turned toward me, his face tight with discomfort. Come on, it's not. No, I cut him off, lifting a hand. It is. And tonight made me realize I'm done. I'm done dimming my light so you don't have to squint. I'm done shrinking so you don't feel uncomfortable. You can keep your world, Adam. I don't belong in it, and honestly, I don't want to anymore. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but I didn't care enough to wait for either. I turned and walked out of that house with my head high, the card still tucked safely in my hand, the smell of biscuits lingering in my hair. I didn't need a grand confrontation. I didn't need one last argument or a scene. I left him a text later that night, one that read, I hope someday you learn to love someone without asking them to be less than they are. I won't be waiting. 2 weeks later, I packed up my little apartment in the city and moved back to Millersburg. The old diner had long since closed after Grandma Ruth passed, but the building was still there, the windows boarded up, the faded sign barely clinging to its hooks. I signed a lease on it within a month. Lou and I kept in touch, his emails full of kitchen tips and old stories from back in the day. Chef Harper made good on his offer too. A phone call here, a recipe critique there. Nothing formal, just a kind of quiet mentorship that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I was building something worth remembering. I started working weekends at a friend's cafe while I saved and sketched out menus in the margins of my grandmother's old recipe book. Comfort food, real food, the kind that sticks to your ribs and reminds you of who you are when the world tries to make you forget. Food with a soul. And every time I bake a batch of those buttermilk biscuits, I remember that night, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because it was the night I stopped asking to be accepted and started claiming my place. It's early morning now, long before the first customer will walk through the door. The bistro's quiet, the kind of peaceful hush that only exists before the world wakes up. I stand in my tiny kitchen, the warm light spilling across the worn butcher block counter, as I knead dough with the same steady rhythm my grandmother taught me years ago. The smell of butter and flour fills the air, familiar and grounding. On the wall above the stove, a cluster of old photographs hangs. My grandmother in her apron, laughing with her hands covered in flour, holding me as a toddler on her hip in the old diner kitchen. She's everywhere in this place. I used to think belonging meant changing yourself, that if you just polished up enough, laughed at the right jokes, swallowed the sting of 100 little insults, you'd eventually be let in. But it doesn't. Belonging isn't about squeezing yourself into spaces that were never meant for you. It's about finding people who see you as you are and believe that's enough, who see the beauty in simple things, in a well-made biscuit, in a stranger's kindness, in the kind of love that asks nothing of you but to be real. I found my place, not in marble dining rooms or country clubs, but here, in a sun-drenched kitchen with mismatched plates and flour on the floor. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And for the record, my grandmother's biscuits are still the best thing you'll ever taste.